Welcome, curiosity seekers, faraway friends, and purveyors and aficionados of games the world over. 'Tis I, Angel, the game master for Darkeport. Thank you for joining me. So, I wanted to give a few words on a somewhat morbid topic, but when to kill player characters. There's a lot to say on this topic. It's probably there's going to be a lot that's kind of beyond the scope of this little snippet. But while I had it in my head, and I've been meaning to do this for a while kind of the stars aligned, I'm finally feeling recovered enough from whatever was going around Austin, Texas, to make this video. Please excuse the frog in my throat, because that was the whole thing. At any rate, so broadly speaking, there are two approaches to player character death, and that is when the world setting calls for it, and when it makes a better story. And what I mean world setting is mechanically. So your old school D&D, you're at 0 hit points, you're dead. 5th edition, more generous. Also, I have to admit, I was skeptical about the death saves at first. I actually really like them as a narrative device now, if they're used intelligently to build tension. But again, you know, 3 failed death saves, dead. And then there's when it makes a better story. And as a counterexample, so makes a better story is very easy to see in well-written books and in strong screenplays. I'll get to RPGs in a second, but James Clavell, who wrote Shogun, my top 3 books for me, it's a flawed masterpiece. He really understood character death, not just in that book, actually in the entire Asian saga, which is what Shogun kicks off. There were some truly impactful and shocking deaths that still absolutely fit within the universe and within the narrative. So in role-playing games, though, where it's not scripted, presumably, Darkeport certainly isn't, and where you have strong element of chance with the dice, you have player agency, even a well-prepared, experienced GM, players are going to do, players are going to be players. They're going to do the thing. So then when your players get into a situation where the rules, and this is the gray area here, because mechanically, aside from outright cheating, as the GM, it's clear when the players are dead. Like I said, we're just going to stick with 5th edition here, where the characters are dead. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. Hopefully not a Freudian slip. I love my table. But you have, the 3 failed death saves. That's it for the characters, or whatever that death mechanic is. Daggerheart, interestingly, is actually going kind of old school, where it's not difficult to die in that system. But then you also have a situation where a logical interpretation is that, say, everybody's down, or the party's getting overwhelmed, and they're just going to keep attacking. The enemy's just going to keep attacking. And then you as the GM are in the situation where you get to decide, okay, is this, am I looking at a party wipe? It's an old school term for total party kill. Am I looking at a party wipe? Am I okay with the party wipe? Or the player is going to be okay with the party wipe? That sort of thing. There's a whole other layer of complexity when you're talking about an actual play, where the story is not merely for the people at the table. The story is essentially a public event, even if it's an asynchronous, after the fact public event. You don't, and this is, I promise that, in the near future, I'm going to gear up to do like a deep dive. It's probably like hour and a half dive into the differences between running a hopefully strong home game and then an actual play game, because they're vast. I mean, it's, as I've alluded to before on this very series, it's really been pretty kind of bewildering and challenging to adapt my GM style to actual play. So I'm going to set that aside. That's beyond the scope of this video, but just that is another factor. So excuse me. So you have this situation, and I'm going to illustrate, because otherwise I could just ramble for hours. I'm going to go ahead and use episode 25, Bend the Knee, of our first campaign. I now have to specify because we have Daggerheart going on, little baby campaign, and just had our first our session 0 and session 1. So in that situation, the setup is usually in games, it's not just, we have gotten away, and I guess this kind of answers part of the question, or this is a partial answer to the question, because we have gotten away from you step on the wrong tile and you're instantly dead. Or modern game design just doesn't like one-hit kills. I have my own thoughts on that. I spent about 2 decades playing a MUD where one-hit kills. It was a role-play intensive MUD, and it was also a permadeath MUD. So once those characters were dead, they're dead. A lot of MUDs, text-based. It stands for multi-user dungeon, but it's like text-based D&D, basically, or text-based, whatever the genre is. You can have anything. Star Trek, Doctor Who, romance, whatever. You just, and that game was deadly. You walk into the wrong room, it was a lot of player versus player, which is another thing, where player versus player as opposed to player versus GM or player with GM. So like I said, there are all kinds of rabbit holes we can go into, and I'm just going to stick to that episode 25. So point being that in episode 24, players had not given themselves the best setup, and essentially they had, if I want to be really reductionist about it, they had about 3 encounters that they had managed to all get to bear down on them simultaneously. They weren't winning that fight. Any one of those encounters was going to be, something. One in particular was going to be like one of my patented, kind of coin toss, like, you better be thinking, you better be on your game, you better be using your resources intelligently. The enemy will make tactical mistakes too, because they're not perfect, but you need to be smarter than them to win that fight, sort of thing. And violence was not the only way. There were many different pathways that could have been taken, but it just, and sometimes people are off. If you went back and you watched the session previous to Bend the Knee, previous to 25, i.e. 24, it was actually a really fascinating kind of breakdown of how things fail. Like, the right ideas at the wrong time, a person vacillating at the wrong time, putting forth, more forcefully putting down a not so optimal idea. It was really interesting to go back and have the luxury of being able to just watch how that unfolded, instead of just being in GM brain, which is a very different mental space to be in than watching and evaluating it objectively, because you're balancing a lot, and again, for actual play, there's always a clock running in my head, and when is intermission, etc. So all that to say, by the time episode 25 rolled around, I had a difficult decision to make, because my education as a GM and my strong preference as a GM is let the chips fall where they may. That isn't to say, so even in the long-running 7-year campaign that we did, a D&D campaign that we did previous to Darkeport, the player character death was rare. It was rare. In fact, actually, I don't think anybody died that whole run, unless I'm forgetting something. Plenty of NPCs bit it. And Corey's character, who plays Merrick now, came the closest. He was one saving throw away from dead, but everybody made it. But they know me as a GM, and they know how unforgiving I can be in situations that they put themselves in, and so that group was really careful. And this leads into my point of how I decided to approach it, because I really thought about what it was impacted by it being an actual play. Like, what makes the best story? while still having integrity with the world, because I'm not going to dumb down the villains or cheat on rolls to keep these characters alive. And because so many of those players have never played with me before and weren't necessarily thinking of it from the perspective of a single misstep and we can die. And, I'll pause here to say one of the best pieces of advice that I can give you as a player, like from player to player, is look at it as though it was real life. Put yourself in that situation. And yes, you have these fantastic abilities. Yes, you're in this world that, has elements that don't exist in real life. But people are people, and danger is danger. So you put yourself in that situation and you think, what would I do to survive this situation? Now, the characters may be braver than you, they may be more prone to violence than you. I get all of that, and I grant all of that. But it still gives it a level of groundedness that just kind of thinking of it as a lark and thinking of these characters as, I was going to say castles in the sky, but I don't know if that makes sense. But thinking of them as just kind of these fictitious creatures running around, which obviously they are. But approaching it that way, you can get some weird results. You can have people, and I'm not. This didn't necessarily happen in that session, but you can get characters mouthing off to NPCs in a way that you just never would in real life. Even if you could back it up, you're just not going to shoot your mouth off like that, or charging into situations where in reality you'd be a lot more careful, especially you're playing a horror game or something like that. You're not just going to run around. So unless you're creating a distraction or something, but I mean just in general. So what I decided to do was to approach it from an education standpoint, and I still want to give the character some agency and have them make choices, but a lot of those choices have been foreclosed, and a lot of the options that were available to them are gone now. And you can see in the sessions that have followed since then, 2 sessions since then, they are in ragged shape, and that's just going to persist until the end of that arc, probably. So, in a home game, what would I have done? Probably would have been a party wipe. That's probably it. Probably would have been gone. And that's okay. Those have their own value. They can be sobering affairs. They could be depressing affairs. You can have players quit the game. You can have them, blow up on you, whatever. That certainly is never going to deter me from something. It may deter some folks, and I definitely wouldn't judge you from that. It depends on why you're playing and what the relationships are and all of that. I'm a bit of a fanatic when it comes to game purity. But instead, I gave the characters an option to be really uncomfortable and to hopefully marinate in their failure, to navigate that particular situation. And it's ongoing, so I don't know if I can't tell you yet if I succeeded. I can't tell you yet what their learning curve is going to be. I can't tell you yet if it would have been better to run with a TPK, or even Final Survivor. They had a handful of characters who might have made it out of that, and then that's an interesting thing when it's not a party wipe, but when 4 out of the 5 characters die. What is that? It's definitely a radical shift, maybe even a reset. Anyway, so yeah, when you get to those points, and you, particularly in that situation where I knew the combat was happening, and you have the luxury of it. What if you don't have the luxury of it, of time, that is, in between sessions? What if combat starts, players are just really off their game, or maybe the rolls are wild, or whatever, and they're in this situation? There isn't a right answer. This is really going to depend on your group, on why you're gaming, on whether or not being true to the story is trumps telling the best story that you can. Maybe telling the best story that you can is the fact that, particularly when you're talking about a bleak story or a really rough story, maybe the best story is that they all get killed. Kind of, again, all goes back to the themes, all of that. But if you don't want to kill them, you can think of ways that are realistic, that are within the bounds of the world, that make sense and don't violate the integrity of the story, but still allow them to stay alive. Topic for another time, exactly how you would do that, but there are options. So anyway, bit of a ramble, but hopefully that was instructive or of some use. And let me know what you think in the comments. I have working on some other stuff, kind of excited. And I'll be out with another one of these videos. My first reply video, I think, to one that a certain Jenny D made, which kind of got our Darkeport Discord chatting, and I appreciated that. It got me thinking, so look out for that. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself as you go out on your journey, and stay curious. Bye.